Welcome to Unit 4, Lesson 3, where we're exploring the power of descriptive language. So we've already done 2 lessons about this, and I've gone over the reading, analysis, and writing. You guys know that we're looking at examples of creative writing similar to the creative writing that you've done, but now we're looking at how other authors have done it and interpreting how they've added kind of meaning, and we're interpreting the meaning out of their creative writing so that we understand how we can use creative writing even more effectively as if that's something that we want to do, and we can definitely read creative writing more effectively as well. So today we're going to be looking at the analysis uh, um, assessment standard. We're going to be looking at how to interpret imagery and word choice for setting. We're gonna ignore the character stuff for now, and we're gonna focus kind of on setting. And we're going to do that by going back to something that I read to you in one of the earlier lessons. So we'll get to that in just a second. You guys are going to be using pages 6 to 7 in the student reader. So the text will show up on the screen here, so you can follow along as you're watching the video. Excuse me. But the student reader is also available for download on Canvas, and you will need to use that for the practice that you're going to do after this lesson. So let's just focus ourselves before we actually do the reading. Let's make sure that we know what we should be focusing on. So as we're reading, and this is what I would have you highlighting or underlining as we were reading if we were doing this in class. So if it is possible for you to have like a paper copy, you certainly don't have to print the student reader, but if it is something that would be helpful for you, or if you're able to figure out how to do it on your computer screen, then you might want to think about underlining or highlighting these things. So how does imagery create the setting in this excerpt? You would want to look for examples of sights, sounds, tastes, smells, sensations, all of which that are contributing toward creating that sense of place and time in this piece of reading. So really focusing in on that and highlighting or underlining those things, or at least taking note of them. You also want to look at how diction is creating the setting in the excerpt. So not just the phrases that create the sights, the sounds, the tastes, the smells, and the sensations, but then specific words that really help make the setting distinct as well. So which words do you think were like especially chosen to contribute to the setting? And then the last thing that you should be thinking about as you're finding those is what kinds of adjectives might you personally choose to use if you were asked to describe this place? So like adjectives, are obviously descriptive words, right? So if you were to look at all of the imagery and look at all of the diction that you are noticing or highlighting or underlining, and had to boil all of that down to one word, one descriptive word of this place, what would that word be? So if you could, well, I was about to tell you to open your booklets, but I guess you don't have that option. If you do have the ability to have it up on your screen, that's great. Otherwise, we are going to be going back to this excerpt from 1984. We're actually going to be reading a little bit more of it than I shared with you in the previous lesson a few weeks ago when we read it. So 1984 by George Orwell. If you were following along with those previous lessons, then you're already familiar with the fact that this is an alternate kind of, it's when it was written, 1984 was far in the future. Now, 1984 is close to 40 years behind us, but it's still kind of an alternate future. It's like this is something that it's considered a kind of dystopian, futuristic writing, and so we'll read this. This is by a famous author called George Orwell. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, a colored poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a meter wide, the face of a man of about 45 with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times it was seldom working, and at present the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in preparation for Hate Week. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about whenever you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. By the way, before I go on, a flat in this book means an apartment. So Winston has reached his apartment and has gone in, and there's this voice reading these figures about pig iron. The voice came from an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror which formed part of the surface of the right-hand wall. Winston turned a switch and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still distinguishable. The instrument, telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. He moved over to the window, a smallish, frail figure, the meagerness of his body merely emphasized by the blue overalls which were the uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades in the cold of the winter that had just ended. Outside, even through the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Down in the street, little eddies of wind were whirling dust and torn paper into spirals, and though the sun was shining in the sky a harsh blue, there seemed to be no color in anything, except the posters that were plastered everywhere. The black mustachioed face gazed down from every commanding corner. There was one on the house front immediately opposite. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said, while the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own. Down at street level, another poster, torn at one corner, flapped fitfully in the wind, alternately covering and uncovering the single word Ingsoc. In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a bluebottle, and darted away again with a curving flight. It was the police patrol snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however. Only the thought police mattered. All right. So we're left with this place, right? There's tons of description of this place. Imagery, diction, a sense of where we are and when we are, and the fact that this is a very different place than maybe what we're used to. So here's what we're going to do with that. Hopefully you've taken note of your diction and imagery. We are going to look at one way to kind of organize that. So you were supposed to be looking at diction and imagery and thinking about adjectives. If you were to take all of these examples of diction and imagery that you noticed and boil them down to one word, what might that word be? And more than likely, you're going to be able to take examples and boil them down to one word, but then you'll say, well, this other word works or this other word works. So, we eventually would need to come up with a list of adjectives. However, for right now, I'm just going to give you an example of one way we could do that. So, and this should help us interpret the details, right? Like we've got all these details. How are we interpreting them? Which is the analysis skill. So if you were to make this, I guess it's what, like a web chart, or I don't know exactly what to call it. I'll call it a web, um, where you've got diction on the left and imagery on the right, just to kind of keep them separate, but they're all leading to this single adjective. Then what you might want to do is just start putting in the diction that you noticed and putting in the imagery that you noticed. I've got 3 spaces for each, and I'm not going to do all of it for you, because if I do all the work for you, then that's me doing the work, not you. But I am going to give you a couple of examples. So I noticed just at the very beginning some specific word choices for the setting. I noticed the word escape. So you can escape from a place, right? And that's in paragraph 1. I also noticed the word heavy in paragraph 1 or 2, excuse me. And that's not to say that I haven't noticed other words. I'm just giving you a couple of examples. So I noticed those 2 words as escape and heavy, and they kind of seem to go together a little bit. They seem to be in a bit of the same kind of context, the same decision making that went into choosing escape probably went into choosing heavy, and I'll get back to that in just a second. I'm going to leave a 3rd diction spot open just to emphasize the fact that there are lots of other choices that you can make. As far as imagery goes, a couple of things that I noticed just at the very beginning. I notice from paragraph 2, the quote that says, "The hallway smelt of cabbage and old rag mats," which is, remember, imagery is any of the 5 senses, and so this is the smell of what many people consider an unpleasant odor, right? A lot of people think that cabbage is stinky, although I kind of like cabbage, honestly. When you boil it, maybe I haven't done enough boiling of cabbage, but a lot of people say that it smells like, let's say, body odors that come out of a specific end of a person. And old rag mats, you can imagine rag mats might soak up the nastiness of whatever's on the floor. And then another piece of imagery that I notice is this one in paragraph 1. It was a bright, cold day in April. So visual in this case. We all know that it could actually also not just be visual, but tactile is what we call this sense of feeling, because we know that feeling of looking out and seeing the sun, but stepping out and it being really cold, right? So if we take all of this information together, the brightness and the coldness, the stinkiness of the place, the sense of kind of just the word escape, the word heavy, all of these are helping to create a place that seems very, I guess, it's not a nice place, right? We don't have pleasant emotional reactions to a lot of this stuff, especially as we start piling up different examples. And so if I were to just take these 4 examples, again, there's plenty more to make. If I were to just take these 4 and try to say, like, what is one adjective that I could use that kind of sums all of these details together, then one adjective that I might choose is the word bleak. If you guys, hopefully you know what the word bleak means, but if you don't, it means kind of just like things don't look good. You look to the future, you look around you, and there's kind of a lack of hope, a lack of motivation, just dull and kind of, depressing, I guess might be another word for it. But I like the word bleak because it emphasizes this kind of like just the kind of hopelessness of the situation. And so this is what I'm going to ask you to do for your practice. You're going to do something like this web, where you're going to look through the entire document, not just the first couple paragraphs, not the work that I've already done, not the word that I've already done, but the entire document, and you're going to find your own examples of what you think are important word choices that describe the setting, as well as important imagery choices or imagistic descriptions that describe the setting. And you're going to come up with your own ideas about adjectives that describe this world. And that'll be the work that will set you up for what we will do in lesson 4 later this week.